Hello everybody, it's Bendominator, and welcome back to another episode of the Bendominator podcast. Today is episode 13 of the Bendominator podcast, and today's episode is going to be a bit different. Today we're going to be going over the entire storyline for Brim Royale Chapter 1, because I've gotten a lot of questions of people asking me to kind of make a video and stuff explaining the storyline, and I thought, hey, the podcast is a really good place to just sit down and talk about the entire storyline from the very start to the end of Chapter 1. And Chapter 2 is just getting started, so there isn't really a lot to talk about there. So I'm not really going to be talking about Chapter 2. I'm mainly just going to go from the very start, even like stuff that happened canonically before Chapter 1 even started. Not everything, but just everything from the very start to the end that is kind of known right now. And yeah, I'm just going to go over all of it, kind of talk about every single trailer, and go over all like the main story beats and everything, and even give a lot of backstory that you guys probably don't know, because we didn't do a very good job of explaining it at the beginning of Brim Royale. There's a lot of things, a lot of reasons for why a lot of stuff is the way it is in Season 1, and I just wanted to go ahead and explain everything here in a podcast. And one of these days, I do want to kind of make a more in-depth video about it. Maybe make a series of videos, kind of like some kind of Brim Royale TV show in a way, and have like episodes of showing all the major storyline things. I think that would be really cool, but that would be like a lot of production time, and that's definitely not something I can get into right now. So that maybe will happen. It's something I want to try doing. I want to do more kind of stuff with the storyline because it has so much potential. Maybe in chapter 2 we'll kind of dive into it more, but for this chapter 1, at least just being able to explain everything so you guys know exactly what happened, I think that's a pretty good thing. So hopefully you guys are excited for that. I'm not going to be answering a whole ton of questions in this podcast. I'm not going to be going over a bunch of Fortnite news in this podcast like I normally do. It's mainly strictly just going to be about Brim Royale story. So just keep that in mind when going into this episode of the podcast, that this is mainly just going to be about Brim Royale. And of course, if you are new to the channel and you don't know what Brim Royale is, it is a map that me and a bunch of people in the dev team made. You can see everyone who's credited if you go to any of the trailers or any of the live streams. Everyone there is credited, and they're all on the Discord server if you want to talk to them or ask questions. And we all came together, we made a map, and it's a mini battle royale map that we've kept running since its inception, and we've had a lot of fun doing it. And we have a complete chapter 1. We are currently in chapter 2, season 2, and there's an entire storyline with it, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. There's also a full playlist of every single trailer and video that I'm talking about in this podcast, so if you guys want to go check it out, it is just the playlist on my channel called Brim Royale. Every single piece of Brim Royale content, other than like all the live streams and stuff, is in that playlist. And you can watch every single trailer, every single teaser, every single, just any cinematic that we made. So that's pretty cool as well. But we're going to be starting from the very, very beginning. And we're going to be explaining a map that's not even technically Brim Royale, and that is the Brim Royale matchmaking hub. Now, this map is a lot more important than you might think, because this is where it all started. The Brim Royale matchmaking hub is formerly known as Brim Corp, and Brim Corp's kind of a pretty important thing that's been in the background this whole time of Brim. We've talked about it on live streams before, so it's not really anything new. It's always been in the story, but there's a chance that you probably just haven't heard of it before because it's never really been explained in a trailer or explicitly shown outside of the matchmaking hub. So the matchmaking hub is Brim Corp, which is pretty much where all the people in Brimland came from, because the people in Brimland used to actually live in a very highly civilized country. Now, most of them still do live there, but there was a large group of them that got sent to the Chapter 1 island. So anytime I reference the island, I'm strictly talking about the Chapter 1 island, of course, because we are talking about Chapter 1. So anytime I reference anything, it is Chapter 1. So they got sent to the island, and pretty much we joke about it at the very beginning And I will warn you, a lot of the story is really dumb, especially in chapter 1. Um, but there is this resource in the world known as Brimite. And due to whatever reason, there's an emergency that happens due to a lack of it. And things go crazy. It's not like some very specific thing that went wrong, just all you need to know, something went wrong. A bunch of people from Brimcorp thought the only way to avoid this disaster was to get as far away from it as possible. So, a very big handful of people at Brimcorp end up evacuating through a portal. And this portal ends up sending them to the island. And the other end of that portal actually is a location that was in the original map, which is called Terrible Tylenol. And this place was originally introduced in Season 1, and it was a pretty overlooked location, but that's where they came from. That was the other end of that portal. So Terrible Tylenol was kind of like a military base, and they all came from that. That's where the portal led them, and when they first got there, Brimland was just an empty swamp. But there were still other people around the map, so they were kind of the last civilization to get there. So when they got there, there were a few other civilizations as well. There was Funny Factories and Wholesome 100. Both of these areas were kind of on the same island, and they included a civilization known as the Robots. Creative name, I know. And the Robots actually have a very important character within them that I will talk about a bit later. And then the other civilization was also the Corrupted people, kind of on Corrupt Core. And they were just a group of people that were sent there for a reason that you'll actually find out later. And it's pretty cool. But pretty much there's a whole part of the map which is Corrupted Core, and then there's another part of the map which is Wholesome 100 and Funny Factories, which is the Robots, and then the Swampland soon becomes Brimland because the people from Brimcorp end up building it, and it is known as Brimland. And then, of course, there is a giant mountain and cave in the center of the map known as Pipe Place. Nothing's really been done there too much. The people at Corrupt Core have been pretty interested in actually mining resources from that cave. And what's really important is that that cave actually holds Brimite in it, which, again, Brimite is a very important resource for the people at Brimcorp. But when the people from Brimcorp got sent to the new island, they were basically stranded. They had no way to contact anybody from Brimcorp. They had no way to return home because the people from Corrupt Core end up actually destroying Terrible Tylenol, which was their only main chance of actually getting back to Brimcorp. And now that that was gone, they're pretty much stuck there forever, living the rest of their days in Brimland. And then, of course, the robots. Now, the robots don't end up doing much, but there is a very important player to the story, and one could argue that he is the main character of Brim Royale, that being the Logger. And yes, the Logger did actually start up as just being kind of the leader of Funny Factories. He was the one who actually built all the robots, and he was the only one in that civilization who wasn't actually a robot himself. He was just a normal guy. But he ended up making all these robots. He ended up kind of transforming that island into a bit of a area that could actually sustain living. And they were kind of the first people to actually start living on the island. So they made factories, and they made Wholesome 100. And of course, the corrupt people came a bit later, and then the Brim people were the last to arrive. So once the Brim people got there, they pretty much just settled in. The corrupt people, of course, took out Terrible Tylenol, and the robots were kind of just chilling on their area of the map. Everything was nice and good. And a little tiny bit of the storyline, which actually involves one of the dev team members, Jake the Dog, or Jake Doggo. He actually arrived on the island as a character, and he set up like a bone shop, a little floating bone shop, over by where Terrible Tylenol was, and then he kind of just started floating around the map, and he ended up creating a bit of a floating society, and this is where season 2 comes in. So at the start of season 2, Jake ends up having his own floaty area known as Floaty Funland, and this is pretty much his own area. He kind of built it off grid or off the grid so that he didn't have to pay anything to anybody else, because if you wanted to live in Brimland, you kind of had to pay the taxes there for that. And then if you wanted to live with the robots and stuff, of course, you pretty much had to pay to own any land anywhere on the map. And that didn't really go too well because, of course, the Brimland people aren't very good at government. So over time, they ended up just abandoning the idea of government overall. But as of now, Jake kind of had to make his own little civilization because, let's face it, he's a bit of a cheapskate and he wants to make the most profit as possible. Who can blame him, honestly? And of course, to make this island, he enlists the help of a couple of axolotls, which are very good at building water civilizations. Just a fun little detail, not very storyline important, but just a fun little detail that I believe the logger did mention in one of his logs. So that's pretty cool as well. And of course, the logger's just kind of chilling out, but he does realize that that cave known as Pipe Place does have some pretty important stuff in it that can help him actually advance his technology. Because the logger, as of now, his main motivation is really just to make the best technology in the world. He kind of wants to just be a master inventor, and he wants to just be able to make some really impressive technology to change the fate of the island forever. He wants to kind of create an energy source powerful enough to power the island for generations, so that it can become sustainable forever, pretty much. So he decides Pipe Place actually has some pretty valuable resources, so he decides to investigate with his team of robots, and they end up building a new kind of base or lair inside of the mountain, and this is where Season 3 begins. So the logger builds up his base, but he soon realizes that the people of Corruptcore aren't really the best neighbors, and they start spreading their corruption a bit more across the island as Season 3 continues. Something else that also happened in Season 3 is that the pirates arrived at Jake's shop, and they kind of made a deal with Jake saying that, hey, if you let us live here, then we will support your business, we will let you stay. We just need somewhere to be because the islands that we were at before weren't great. We kind of went on a voyage, and this is where we ended up. And Jake agreed to that offer. Of course, he did get a lot of sales in the process as his bone shop being upgraded with all the new pirate things, and that soon became Pirate Party Land. And I think that was a pretty cool spot for the pirates to kind of hang out. And then also just the robots kind of ended up leaving funny factories behind in the process of moving into Pipe Place, so that place was kind of free real estate at that point. Now, there were still people kind of in Wholesome 100 that were hanging out there, but as far as funny factories, nothing was happening there because all the factory things that needed to happen were actually happening at Pipe Place. So any production of any goods were happening at Pipe Place. Funny factories wasn't really needed anymore, unfortunately. So once the logger moved in, of course, to Pipe Place, he immediately started mining Brimite because it was a very powerful resource. But the corrupted people also realized that as well. So the corrupted people were taking out more of the island. They were kind of spreading the corruption even more and more. And the logger was not very excited about that. So he immediately started to find a way to end the corruption. And it did take quite a while. He tried quite a few things, and he overall realized that this would be a lot harder than he thought it would be. Overall, the pirates were kind of enjoying their time. The Brimland people had quite a lot to worry about, actually, as the corruption was affecting their livelihood quite a bit, kind of contaminating their waters even more. I mean, they already lived in the swamp, but corruption water is definitely not so great either, so they weren't really having a fun time either. So it was kind of all up to the logger to kind of fix this problem. So in the end, the corruption almost fully took over. I mean, they had a giant floating island on top of Pipe Place. We had a whole LTM about the corruption, and it was a pretty scary time, honestly, for the map. It was probably the first time the map was in actual real danger of being destroyed, but luckily the logger was actually able to solve the issue. Now, there's one little island in the center of the map that is actually quite beloved in the Brim Royale community, that being the Slurp Island, or just known as Slurp. Uh, this island actually held a lot more power than the logger realized at the start, and he realized he could use the energy of it plus the energy of Brimite to create a device that could actually stop the corruption. So he ended up stopping the corruption with that device, and while it did destroy Slurp in the process, it did save the entirety of the island. So I believe it's a fair trade. Few people still upset about Slurp leaving. I can understand that, but the island had to be saved some way or another, and that was probably the only way that it could actually happen. So that was kind of the logger's first really big part of the storyline. Moved into Pipe Place, stopped the corruption, mined for Brimite, and is currently trying to perfect his technologies to create an even larger power source for the island to keep it sustainable for years to come. But while all of that was happening, there was a certain new species that had actually arrived on the island, those being the Pogladites. Throughout that whole season of season 3, they had started construction where funny factories used to be, because like I said before, that was pretty much free real estate at this point. The robots abandoned it, and there wasn't really anything being done there. No one owned it, so the Pogladites took over. And that wasn't really a problem at the start. In the beginning of season 4, they ended up building an entirely new civilization, which was actually really cool. They had an entire city, they had an entire storage facility, and they didn't seem too threatening, but the Brimland people were definitely pretty upset about it, because what actually ended up happening is that the Pogladites wanted to conquer more. They had that piece of land in their funny factories, but they wanted more. They wanted more of the island for themselves because they wanted to expand their empire. And of course, the Brimland people were the first to kind of have to face up against this. Brimland was the first target of kind of conquering. And what ended up happening is a war set out. And this war was pretty quiet at the start. Mostly people getting ready, people getting armed, because conflict was brewing slowly over time. This wasn't something that just happened overnight. So conflict was brewing. Things were getting pretty tense on the island, honestly. But while that was happening, the logger only had one goal in mind. He realized that after he destroyed the corruption at Corrupt Core, he set up a new base over by where it used to be. So it was now a nice little area. And he realized that there was some strange energy signs that were left over from the corruption. And he had a theory about this, because he had experienced a time where he had lived previously somewhere that had a really, really big energy source. And the last time that he had kind of seen something like that, it had led to the 0 point. And the 0 point is an idea that most of you are probably familiar with, of course, being a big part of the Fortnite storyline. The 0 point in this universe is quite different from the 0 point in Fortnite, to a point where I kind of do regret calling it the 0 point, because it's other than like appearance, it's honestly pretty different from Fortnite's 0 point. Of course, the 0 point is pretty powerful, but it's not really a device that you can use to travel through time or travel through space. It's mostly just an extremely powerful source of energy. So as of now, the 0 point is kind of the logger's best bet to create the most energy for the island to keep it sustainable forever. And he obviously wants to be able to find that and harness that power, not really knowing how destructive that could actually be in the long run. So, of course, he immediately starts digging for it. It's going to take some time, and that's what he's doing as the war is finally starting to brew. So, once he starts digging, he realizes that the war has begun. The war between Brimland and Pog City. The war that had been brewing for an entire season up to that point. And what ended up happening is the fight just started. There was a really, really cool LTM for it. I thought it was a lot of fun. But pretty much what ended up happening is Brimland, even though they seemed less powerful, they actually won. They won against the Pogladites. And that's mainly because of the amazing kind of leadership skills of their leader, the Tomato Head. And the first time I'm kind of mentioning it here because this is the first time where it kind of plays a big role in the story. The Tomato Head is the leader of the people of Brimland, and he led them in the War of Brimland against Pog City, and he came up with an amazing battle strategy to just overwhelm them with explosives, which seems pretty simple, but I guess Pog City didn't really think about that first, so that's what they ended up doing. They ended up blowing Pog City up, and it was disastrous in the long run, honestly. This probably wasn't the best decision for the long run of the island, but for that simple conflict, they were able to end up winning over Pog City, of course. So Pog City was pretty angry at them because there were still quite a few survivors left, and they had one extra trick up their sleeve. They actually were able to get in contact with the logger, and they were able to get him on board with their ideas. Now, when they told logger the logger about what they wanted to do, they told him that what they were doing would help him find the 0 point. And of course, the logger being desperate for the 0 point, he was like, okay, if I can get to the 0 point faster, if I can find a faster way to get to the 0 point, I could help him out. I mean, he's a pretty nice guy. He's willing to do quite a bit. And he decided that he would help start working for them. But what soon happened after the destruction of Pog City, the whole island kind of paid dearly for it. Because the entire island kind of became an apocalyptic wasteland after that. A lot of the kind of bombs and stuff that the people of Brimland used was pretty toxic, and it ended up creating a not so livable environment. And that wasn't great. So, of course, the logger, this is now in season 5, the logger is able to go help the people of Pog City. He goes over to Pog Storage in a brand new apocalyptic outfit, and he decides, all right, let me help you. And he doesn't really understand what he's getting himself into at this point. Meanwhile, Brimland is happy, actually. I mean, they're not very happy about the whole entire island kind of being in an apocalyptic state, but they're happy about their victory. So nonetheless, they are celebrating, and they are having a good time. And the Tomato Head is able to just sit back and relax and enjoy the victory while everyone else is worrying about this giant apocalypse that's happening. Also, at Jake's area, Jake and the pirates, honestly, they're like fed up with this, and they decide to just dip. They leave. They go as far away as possible because they know that whatever's about to happen next can't be good. So they all leave. They get out of there. Jake ends up actually staying. The pirates end up leaving. Jake stays, and he kind of ends up going over to Brimland because what happens to Pirate Partyland is not very great. Since the people of Pog City ended up actually needing a home, they ended up just taking the pirates home. I mean, the pirates left, Jake was still there, but they kind of just kicked Jake out, and they ended up taking his home away from him. He did live with the people of Brimland. His house was still standing, but it wasn't in great shape. It was pretty much a whole junkyard at the point. But for all the people of Pog City, it was a good enough place to live, so that became Survivor Sanctuary. And of course, the Pog people lived there. Jake was chilling with the people of Brimland, and the logger was still trying to create this device that he really hadn't heard a lot about. He was making this with the intention of, well, he made it with the thought that this would be a device that would help him get to the 0 point. But, well, it did help him get to the 0 point. The 0 point wasn't exactly where he expected it to be, because he later realized once the rocket was fully armed and ready to launch that it was actually heading towards Brimland. And this had actually just been an entire ploy for the people of Pog City to get back at Brimland for winning the war, because in their minds, the war wasn't actually over yet. The war never actually ended in Season 4. The war had been going this entire time, and Pog City decided that it wasn't over, they were going to get back at them with this massive rocket. And the logger was like, uh-oh, that ain't good. Let's pull 180. He actually ended up turning on the people of Pog City, ended up turning on the Pogladites, and he ended up fighting for Brimland against them to try and stop the rocket, and that's where the Stop the Rocket LTM came in. They were all trying to fight it off, but unfortunately, they weren't able to stop it in time because it ended up detonating, and it ended up crashing straight into Brimland, completely destroying it in the process, and actually unearthing the 0 point. Because as it turns out, yeah, the logger was actually wrong about where the 0 point was. He was completely wrong about the location of the 0 point because the energy that he was actually tracking at Camp Core, that was actually just a bunch of corruption like energy left over from its destruction, and he never even thought to check Brimland. I mean, in the entire chapter 1, the logger really never actually went to Brimland. He never really set foot in that area. Same with Pirate Party Land and, well, now Survivor Sanctuary. He never really went to either of those places. And so he never really thought to look in Brimland, and of course, there it was, the 0 point. Brimland completely destroyed, most of its people dead, unfortunately. But quite a few survivors, actually. More importantly, the Tomato Head, and just a good handful of the people in Brimland. Of course, their population had actually grown over a lot of these seasons, so they still have more people than they did when they first arrived. And of course, they were pretty angry about that. I mean, they were pretty upset, and the people of Pog City, were like, yeah, this didn't make anything better. In fact, it made the apocalypse way worse, to the point where the 0 point was revealed and it was pretty much messing up the entire island because the energy was just so strong and it was so damaged that it could blow at any minute. And the logger realized this, and he was like, if this thing blows up, everyone on this island is dead, and he has one last chance to fix everything. But he realizes he can't fix it. It's the 0 point. It's the most powerful energy on the island. And it's probably the most powerful energy in the world. How is he gonna just fix that? He can't. There's no device, no power that he can use other than the 0 point itself to fix it, and that would be way too risky. So he thinks, well, how did the people of Brimland actually get to this island to begin with? They went through a portal. So maybe they could all just abandon this island because at this point, there's nothing they can do to save it. It's past of no return. The logger, in attempts to create an island that was sustainable forever, ended up creating an island that was crumbling every second. And he realized this, and he decided, hey, let's just start fresh. So, with the help of his robots, he created a brand new portal right where Terrible Tylenol used to be, kind of mimicking the style of Terrible Tylenol. And he said, hey, we're going to go through this portal, we're going to start anew, we're going to leave the Pog people behind because they weren't so great to us. And he's just going to take him, he's going to grab as many of the robot scraps as he can, and he's going to take as many of the people from Brimland as he can. And of course, Jake is there too. They all run through the portal. Everybody on the map runs through the portal in this like really climactic, dramatic event. And that's where it all ends. After they go through the portal, probably about a few minutes later, the 0 point explodes. All the people in Pog City, everybody who was left on the island is gone. The entire island is gone, and it's pretty much reduced to nothing. Nothing is there. The 0 point isn't there, just everything destroyed. And just complete cataclysmic event. And after that, of course, that's where chapter 2 begins, and that's kind of what we're in now. The logger and a bunch of the people from Brimland go on to the other side of the portal, and they end up on a brand new island. This island was already inhabited when they got there. The only thing they built themselves was the logger built his own house at Itchy Isle, and the people of Brimland built their town, or they built Brimland in the swamp. And yeah, that's where they are at now, living their best summer vacation days after the terrible events that happened prior. And the logger feels quite guilty about all the events that happened, and is currently retired because he doesn't want to mess anything up again. And that's where our story is now. Of course, there's things that have happened in chapter 2 that I'm not going to talk about, of course, because this was just to discuss chapter 1. Hopefully that made enough sense. I know I'm not very great at explaining things, but hopefully that made enough sense. And if you watch the trailers, it's pretty easy to tell, I would say, a lot of that stuff. There were a few minor details that maybe you probably didn't pick up on when you watched the trailers, or things like Brimcorp existing is something we've only really talked about in live streams. But other than that, yeah, I think that's pretty much the full entire story of Brim Royale. And I'd really love to just turn that into like a full movie someday or something. But as for now, that is the story of Brim Royale. And yeah, it was pretty silly. It was pretty dumb, but it was a lot of fun, and I'm really happy we did it. And I cannot wait to tell even more crazy, dumb, silly stories in chapter 2 because I think honestly, out of all the things of Brim, I feel like that's what we do best. I think telling just a fun, stupid story is what we do best. And we had a lot of fun doing chapter 1 story, and I cannot wait to see what's in store for chapter 2 because we have a lot of fun things planned. And yeah, that's pretty much the entire story. I actually talked about it for less time than I actually thought I would. I didn't think it would actually. I mean, it still took like 30 minutes to explain the entire story, uh, which is why it's not a simple task. It's not a simple task to explain the whole chapter 1 story because it takes a very long time. It's a very long story. There's a lot of things happening. I mean, things happening in the background, things happening while other things are happening, but I think the main thing about the story is just the logger's entire arc. I mean, the logger starts and he wants power, and then he kind of realizes that these things were a lot more crazy than he imagined, and he went through a bunch of crazy stuff, and in the end, he made a lot of mistakes, and he caused a lot of problems, but I believe that he'll make up for them one day. So, I think the logger is probably the. I would say the logger is the main character of Brim Royale at this point, at least for chapter 1. And I'm just excited to see what happens next. So, I mean, I know what happens next, but I'm excited to share it with you guys and to turn it into an actual experience and to turn into trailers and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I hope you guys are excited as well. I was gonna answer questions about kind of the storyline. I didn't get like a crazy amount of ones, so I'm probably gonna leave them for the next episode of the podcast, if I do end up getting back to them. So, if you left questions, thank you, but I think I'm just gonna leave it at that for now. I think I'm gonna keep it concise and simple, and just say there's the story. Hopefully, I know there's a lot to explain, so hopefully I explained it pretty well. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. But again, if you do, or if you're still kind of confused about the storyline, I would just go back and watch all the trailers, honestly, because the trailers pretty much give you everything you need to know. There's, of course, things like Brimcorp and stuff that isn't explained, but that stuff isn't really mandatory. That's just kind of backstory to it all. And yeah, that's the storyline. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I know this podcast is a bit shorter, but I honestly expected that to take me a lot longer, and that's kind of all I had planned for today's episode. Um, but yeah, that's about gonna be it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. I know it was a bit different, but I hope you enjoyed it because I know a lot of people just wanted to hear the entire storyline. So there it is for all the people who are asking for it. Again, I hope that one day I'll be able to turn it into a like if not chapter 1 story, then chapter 2 story. Hopefully we'll be able to do some some cooler things with that and kind of explain it better throughout the entirety of its run. But for now, that's the storyline. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you guys in the next episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble yet again for another week. And I'll see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your day, and goodbye.